Hello everybody, I'm Sylleaf. This will be part 3, chapter 3 of The Notebook. When Aizawa had gotten to the police station, he was expecting the so-called circumstances that Naomasa mentioned to be something like the guy had an analysis quirk, or he was a villain, or something. What he didn't expect in a million years was that the guy who Shota had thought was at least over 20 and actually had a quirk to help him write everything down. To be a quirkless 14-year-old with the nerves of a deer, ready to bolt at the slightest sound. Once again, the underground pro found himself looking through the one-way glass of the small room for questioning. Only this time he wasn't looking at Fujiwara. He was looking at the owner of the notebook. The person that could end Hero Society with just his mind alone. "Good evening, Aizawa-kun, Naomasa-kun," a high-pitched voice said from the opening door. Aizawa glanced over at the sound, seeing Naomasa holding the door open to Nezu, as he nodded in greeting. "Evening," the underground pro responded. Nezu hummed, making his way over to a chair before climbing up its side and standing atop it, looking into the small room. He paused, looking into the glass before turning to Sakachi with a quizzical look in his black eyes. "I assume this is our mystery analyst, Midoriya?" the rodent asked. Naomasa nodded as he made his way from the now shut door over to both Aizawa and Nezu. "He is." The detective then turned to the underground pro, who was sporting a confused expression. "He's a kid," Shota said, though it came out as more of a question. Sakachi nodded once more, handing the long-haired man a manila folder. Aizawa took it before slowly flipping it open. He looked at the nervously smiling photo of the greenette, the photo clearly taken from a school's picture day, if the Gakuron in blue background was anything to go off of. He then looked to the dark text of the page, his chin tucking into his scarf as he read. Midoriya Izuku, date of birth, July 5th, 24XX, age, 14, sex, male, height, 166 centimeters, hair color, green, eye color, green, blood type O, parent/guardian, Midoriya Inko. Address, Shizuoka Prefecture, Musutafu, apartment 23. Occupation, student. Quirk status, quirkless. Aizawa blinked, staring dumbly at the page and unmotivated to look further. Quirkless. How on earth could the kid that analyzed probably hundreds of heroes to the level held within the book they found, be quirkless? Sure, it wasn't unheard of, but the kind of information he wrote down was on the level Nezu would be interested in getting his paws on. Quirkless? Shota asked, slowly peeling his dark eyes off that very word within the folder to look at the detective. Naomasa gave a swift nod before responding. That's one of the circumstances I mentioned over the phone. The other one is the fact that he's a literal kid. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, whilst taking the folder from Aizawa slowly and handing it to the principal. Nezu hummed. "This is very interesting," he commented, shutting the file and reaching a paw up to set it down on the table in front of him. "I wonder, has he had an IQ test before?" "Not any that are on record," Sakachi responded, causing the hybrid to put a paw under his snout in thought. "I'd like to get one for him after we meet." Aizawa raised a brow, looking at his boss, but not making a move to speak. The rodent clapped his paws together as his mouth curved up into a smile, or as well as it could. "I think I'd like that to be sooner rather than later. Don't you agree?" Once more, Shota's expectations of the kid shattered once they entered the room. The kid had taken one look at them before bursting into tears and started apologizing. Aizawa was taken aback. He wasn't very good with kids, and especially crying ones, despite him being a teacher. Dealing with kids was more his husband's, Hazashi's thing, or Yue's counselor, Hound Dog's thing, not him. So when Midoriya started crying, he froze for a moment, not knowing what to do. Nezu, however, seemed to be better than he was, going over to the kid and patting his knee with one of his paws, whilst the other rested on the small of his back. There, Midoriya-kun. You don't need to apologize now. You've done nothing wrong. You're just here to answer a few questions," the rodent said, his comforting motion unwavering as he spoke. The kid sniffled, running a palm over one of his eyes as he looked to the principal. The tears that were flowing like a waterfall just moments before were starting to calm down, but the wary look in the greenet's eyes stayed. "Questions?" Midoriya choked out. Nezu nodded, bringing his paw from the teen's knee to join his other on the small of his back. I'm sure you've noticed that one of your possessions was missing, correct? Izuku's expression grew more confused, but the rodent just gestured to Tsukachi while moving to sit on one of the chairs in front of the teen. Aizawa watched for a moment before following both of his colleagues to sit across from the kid. The underground pro's mind was racing. He couldn't quite place it, but something about how Midoriya was acting seemed wrong. And it reminded Shota of how some of the people he rescued acted. Being an underground hero meant Aizawa would be shown the more gruesome side of heroics, dealing with things limelights usually didn't. He's dealt with trafficking, drug dealers, assaults, abuse cases, and more. And the way Midoriya was acting reminded the pro too much of some of those cases. The detective placed the burnt and waterlogged number 13 notebook that all three of them had grown familiar with, and Aizawa saw the recognition and relief flood over the kid's face almost instantly once his Viridian eyes landed on it. "My notebook," the brunette said, his voice full of alliteration. Nezu hummed as he leaned forward slightly, his black eyes intrigued as his tail swayed slightly. "So it is in fact yours?" the hybrid inquired. Midoriya teared his eyes away from the notebook, the action looking almost forceful. He nodded, the confused look making its way back onto his face. "Are you aware that what is held in it could be very harmful?" Izuku's eyes widened, growing misty once more. "What?" he croaked out, his voice full of dread. The principal nodded. "Indeed, what you have written down is very dangerous, Midoriya-kun." Aizawa looked between his boss and the kid, his dark eyes narrowing in question, as his arms folded against his chest. The way Nezu was talking was as if he was trying to get Midoriya to crack, and as much respect he has for the rodent, this was one thing he couldn't agree with, even if the kid could be a villain. The underground pro tucked his chin into his scarf, forcing himself to keep quiet. "Have you thought of this before?" Nezu continued. The teen stuttered before shaking his head. "No, Nezu, sir." The hybrid raised a brow. "If I may ask, Midoriya-kun, what are you doing with this information?" The teen paused, hesitated for a moment, before speaking. "I was using it to help me in a way. I thought if I studied heroes and how they worked and fought, then it would help me in the future." "Would." Aizawa spoke up finally, lifting his head from his capture weapon. Midoriya looked down at his lap uncomfortably. "I can't be a hero," he said, as if it was a fact of some sort. Aizawa's brows furrowed together in confusion. "What do you mean, kid?" I'm quirkless. I can't be a hero. I'd just get myself killed." "And why's that?" Nezu inquired. "I've taken a look at your notebook, Midoriya-kun. It's very impressive. I'm sure you'd do well in the field of heroics." The teen's freckled cheeks grew a light shade of pink as the corners of his lips twitched up in an awkward smile as he looked away, clearly embarrassed by the comment. "Thank you, but..." He trailed off, his smile slowly morphing into a frown. "I can't be a hero. All Might even said it." Aizawa froze, his eyes widening a fraction. What did the kid mean? He looked at Midoriya for a long moment as the room fell into a deafening silence, before he glanced at Tsukachi, the latter sporting a somewhat baffled look. It wasn't a lie. Years of working with Nomasa had made detecting if something was a lie or not a sixth sense of sorts for the underground pro. In the earlier months of working with the detective, he would state if something was a lie or not with small hand movements, like tapping on the table for a truth, or crossing his middle finger over his index for a lie. This way, it made it so the person they were questioning didn't know about Tsukachi's quirk until they felt necessary. However, over the years, Shota had learned the tall tale signs of whether his quirk was detecting a truth or a lie. Little things like face tics, emotions, or body movements would give it away for the underground pro. And right now, what Midoriya just said rang true. "What do you mean by All Might said it?" the detective asked slowly, his voice careful but having an underlying edge to it. The kid must have caught it, though, because his nervous expression that Shota thought couldn't get any worse did. The brunette paused and swallowed roughly as his hands began to wring together in his lap tightly. Aizawa had half the mind to reach out and stop the kid, but he held back. "All Might saved me the other day, and I asked if I could become a hero, and His breath caught and became shaky before he continued. He said I couldn't be one. Shota's teeth gritted together hard enough to make them groan under the pressure. What the hell was that blonde idiot thinking? Nezu, who seemed more level-headed than both the underground pro and the detective, spoke up, his tone careful. Saved you. Izuku nodded, his gaze falling back to his hands as they rained together tighter. I got attacked by the sludge villain before the second attack. The hybrid's tail moved through the air slowly. Both Aizawa and Tsukachi could tell he was rather upset by the revelation, but despite this, he spoke calmly. Did you get medical attention afterwards, Midoriya-kun? Those attacks happened in a rather quick succession, and for what you're telling me, All Might was at both, meaning he couldn't take you himself. Not to mention this attack was never reported. The brunette stiffened in his seat before speaking in a quiet and hesitant voice. I didn't. Nezu leaned forward in his seat, a quizzical look in his eyes. And why's that? You could have been hurt internally. Midoriya's hands twisted together tightly as his eyes grew misty once more, and he didn't answer for what felt like hours. I needed to get home to help my mom with something. The detective's face twitched slightly, like he was biting into something sour, but was making an effort to hide it. The principal's eyes drifted to Namasa for only a second before they were focused back on the teen. I appreciate if you told the truth, Midoriya-kun. The teen's eyes widened as his whole body froze. His brooding eyes slowly drifted up and to the detective, the green pit calculating and fearful, before he shrunk in his seat and looked back down. I had to treat a burn, he said hesitantly. Burn? Aizawa asked, careful to keep any hint of anger out of his voice. It seemed that any sort of negative emotion affected the teen greatly, and Shota would rather not have the kid become more of a nervous wreck than he already was. I got burned earlier by a classmate. The underground pro paused, and his eyes widened once more. A classmate burned him. Even if Aizawa has seen the statistics of quirkless people, even if he knows how often they get bullied, abused, or neglected, what Midoriya said made his stomach sink and twist uncomfortably in his gut, like the effects you get when you ride down a roller coaster's steep hill. Izuku made a small choking noise before the tears he was holding back throughout the entire interrogation let loose. This time, however, Aizawa didn't freeze. He didn't even hesitate as he stood up from his seat and made his way over to the side of the teen. The underground pro crouched before placing his own hand over the hands that seemed painfully twisted together. Midoriya. Shota started as he tilted his head a bit to catch the teen's ducked gaze. You can take your time, but I need you to tell us who gave you the burn. And fuck, Aizawa half wishes he didn't ask. Midoriya had been horribly abused once his quirklessness became knowledge to his peers. His classmates bullied him to the point of suicide baiting, and his teachers, who were supposed to put a stop to the behavior, ignored the kid, sometimes even joining in. The more the underground hero knew, the more frustrated and disgusted he got. Who would treat a kid like they were less than human over something they can't even control? And more importantly, who would let it happen? Once the Greenette had made it to All Might's part in the story, Aizawa had to hold back. He wanted to punch the man, to get him fired, or something. Because who in their right mind would leave a kid on a roof after telling them they couldn't become a hero? After crushing their dream that they held on to so tightly for their whole life. By the time Midoriya finished, he was bawling and clutching tightly into the front of Shota's costume, the former holding him to their chest. The underground pro slowly tore his eyes away from the bush of curls under his hand and looked to the detective. Tsukachi's eyes locked with his, and a horrified look was within the dark swirls, and Shota's heart broke for the kid. It was true. All of it was true. Aizawa was going to have to talk to whoever this Kachan was, and more importantly, pay a visit to the Greenette school. Alright everybody, that concludes Chapter 3, Part 3 of the Notebook. I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you for listening.